Welcome, nutritionradio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, a university nutrition professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in. Lecture time. Hey, everybody. Well, today we've got part 3 of that digestion lecture. This podcast is in the science category, so I understand that it's not for everybody to go sit in a lecture and listen to this kind of thing, but that's the purpose of this kind of thing. If you understand a system, then you can ask the right questions about it when you talk to a nutritionist or a trainer. You can manipulate the system as best you can. And in this case, just as an example, we talk about that myth that never goes away, that you can only digest 30 grams of protein at a time. If you want to know why that's a myth, we're going to tell you today. We'll get through the small intestines, which is really the business end of digestion and absorption in many ways, at least a focal point. And then next time, we'll get to large intestine and all that entails with the microbiome, etc. So let's go on in the classroom. Okay. Small intestine. What do we need to know about this? Well, there are 3 parts. The first one is the duodenum, which we've already talked about, or duodenum. It's 10 inches long. It's very important because this is where you get input from some of your accessory digestive organs. There's a duct that comes in, the common bile duct, and it brings in secretions from, your liver and pancreas, other digestive accessory organs that lie outside of the GI tract. So the duodenum is very important. The second section of your small intestine is the jejunum, Jejunum, jejunum. It's 4 feet long. So that's quite a bit coiled around, right, in your viscera, in your gut. And that's where a lot of absorption starts taking place. Those carpet-like villi lining the interior. It's not just a hose, like a garden hose. It has lots of little villi, finger-like projections that increase its surface area massively. And we'll get to that. The third major section of the small intestine is the ileum, I-L-E-U-M. It's about 5 feet long. So again, it's comparably very long, and you're going to get more absorption there. And of course, the ileum eventually will connect with your large intestines. Things to know. Second major bullet here, most digestion happens in the small intestine. It produces enzymes. Like we talked about, there's some enzymes in your saliva from your salivary glands. We have certain enzymes in your stomach. It's not just acid in your stomach, by the way. There are certain enzymes. But you get further enzymes produced in your small intestines. So further digestion, breaking down those food molecules even further, and absorption. So our fourth major bullet on this slide is most absorption occurs in the small intestines too. In fact, I put a star on it because you really need to know this. 95% roughly of the macronutrients, proteins, carbs, and fats, are digested and absorbed. Your body is really good at breaking down and absorbing these tiny macronutrient molecules. Sometimes I will hear people say, how much protein can you digest at one time? Because they're interested in building muscle tissue or dieting or whatever it might be. And I'm always quick to point out, well, almost all of it. It's people will float around this silly notion that you have a 30-gram limit of how much protein you can digest or absorb. That's just not accurate. They're sort of confusing the point. The issue with protein, and we'll get to this in the protein chapter, is not how much you can digest. It's what your body's capability is to act on all those absorbed amino acids. Do you have enough anabolic hormones and other systems in place to build them into muscle tissue? But it's not the digestion absorption that's so limiting. So about 95%, it varies between proteins, carbs, and fats, but about 95% of all macronutrients are digested and absorbed. So on the diagram here, we're looking at the small intestine portion. And again, it shows those carpet, like those finger projections, the folds and the little nubs, the villi, V-I-L-L-I. And that really helps absorbing all of the nutrients. If we go to the next slide, it's a your turn quiz question type slide. See if you can answer this. These protein-based substances enhance digestion by making chemical reactions more likely to happen. What did we say those were called? If you said enzymes, you're correct. Enzymes, again, they end in A-S-E. The words do. And they have very specific targets. So enzymes are protein-based substances that enhance digestion by making chemical reactions more likely to happen. These hydrolyzing reactions, they use water to break down the foods, the bolus, right, that you swallow. All right, on the next slide, we've got a anatomy picture. This is more of a close-up, and you can see small intestines. If you look at the top, there's also muscles around your small intestines, arguably not as muscular as the stomach, but there's still some churning and some peristalsis-type muscular contractions that move food through. So there is a outer lining of muscle. The inner lining, right, the lumen is the empty center. The lumen is lined, the inner lining, with the intestinal mucosa, and that is made up of villi. So we see a cross-section from the big tube of the intestine at the top. We go down the left side of this diagram, we can see the individual villi. Now, amazingly, each villi is covered with microvilli. So it's nubs on top of nubs. So imagine the surface area. It's many, many times what a simple hose would be. The way I usually describe this in class is if you look at your hand, go ahead and take a look at your hand, put your fingers together, flat hand, fingers together. How far is it from your tip of your thumb to the tip of your pinky? Maybe 3 or 4 inches, something like that. Now spread your fingers out. Those are like villi. Now, hugging tightly against your skin, go from the tip of your thumb, around that arch up to the tip of your index finger, down and around to the tip of your middle finger, and then your ring finger, and then to your pinky. Now we're probably talking about 8 or 9 inches. Do you follow me? So the surface area of your small intestines is enormous. Now imagine if you had little tiny finger-like nubs on each finger. So no wonder we digest and absorb about 95% of the macros, the macronutrients that we consume. Now, let's look down at the bottom. If we look at the microanatomy of one of these little nubs, this is important to nutrition. It's not just anatomy for its own sake. If we look in the a villi, you have blood vessels. You can see there's red and blue. People are usually used to looking at arterial and venous blood as red and blue. So these are tiny little capillaries, and that's where the water mixable macronutrients will go. That's where protein and carbohydrates go. They get broken down to their very most basic parts like glucose molecules or fructose molecules or certain amino acids. Those go right into your bloodstream. But if you look in the middle there's a lacteal. Lacteal. A lacteal is a lymph vessel. A lot of students, if they're not in the sciences, they're a little less familiar with their lymph vessels, but imagine like a silhouette of the body. You see the red and the blue arteries and veins. Well, there's also a network that's sometimes shown as yellow or green. That's your lymph circulation. And there's no central pump like your bloodstream has with the heart, right? You do have lymph nodes in your armpits, in the axillary crease there, and where your legs meet your torso in the inguinal crease. You have lymph nodes, and as you move around during the day, just sort of sloshing and moving, you get lymph drainage and movement of lymph. Fats actually go into that system before they hit your bloodstream. The fats that you eat will eventually hit your bloodstream. For those of you with clinical interest, it's at the subclavian area under your collarbone where the lymph system kind of drains into your bloodstream. So the fats do eventually get into your bloodstream, but first they go into your lymph. And that's a classic test question when it comes to villi or fat absorption is where does the fat go first? It doesn't go straight into your blood like the watery carbs and proteins. It goes into your lymph, into that little lacteal structure. And they even show a tiny enterocyte, or intestinal cell, absorptive cell, on the lower right of this diagram. So you could get the idea there's a little nucleus there and all the usual structures and little microvilli at the top. If any of you are interested enough in nutrition to take part 2 of this class, which is advanced nutrition, we talk more about those microvilli and things like that. I show you real pictures, not just cartoons of some of these things.
Okay, so there you have it. That's what's going on with your guts when it comes to digestion and absorption perspective. The next and final installment we'll do of this is about your large intestine, and that's where we talk about gut microbiota and all that sort of thing. But at least here, you get the idea about what's happening inside you. So when you swallow food, how it gets broken down, what organs are involved, and all that kind of thing. I hope that was enriching for you science nerds, and we'll see you next time. The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.